The end is near. The sky over Zorvik Prime was burning. Fiery streaks lit up the atmosphere as debris from destroyed defense stations fell, crashing into the shattered cities below. Smoke and ash choked the air, and the once thriving world was now little more than a graveyard. High above the planet, the HFY Dominion's fleet hovered like hungry predators, their massive warships blocking out the sun. The Zorvaks, a peaceful and intelligent species, had no hope left. Their defenses were shattered. Their fleets were destroyed. Their leaders were either dead or in hiding. Inside the last remaining Zorvak command bunker, a group of desperate survivors huddled around a flickering holo display. Chancellor Valen, the highest-ranking official still alive, stared at the map with empty eyes. Red dots, enemy forces, had surrounded their last city. There was no way out. "The HFY will break through in less than an hour," whispered General Zeklor, his voice hollow. "We cannot stop them." Silence filled the bunker. They all knew the truth. Zorvik Prime was lost. A plead for help. For months, they had sent distress signals into the void, hoping that some unknown force would come to their aid. But the galaxy was cruel. No one wanted to risk their own lives to save a dying race. "We have one last transmission," said Commander Lyrith, his scaled hands shaking as he adjusted the controls. "It is our final cry for help." Chancellor Valen nodded weakly. He knew it was useless, but he had to try. Even if no one was listening, he couldn't let his people die without trying one last time. With a trembling voice, he spoke into the communicator. "This is Chancellor Valen of Zorvik Prime. Our world is under siege. The HFY Dominion has destroyed our fleets and slaughtered our people. We beg anyone, to help us. This is our last transmission. If you hear this, please, save us." As the message was sent into the void, a deep rumble shook the bunker. The HFY ground forces had breached the outer walls. "They're here," whispered General Zeklor, gripping his weapon. The end had come. The sky burns. Outside the bunker, the Zorvaks fought desperately, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Zelfhar warriors, hulking, armored brutes with glowing red eyes, stormed through the ruins, cutting down anyone who stood in their way. A lone Zorvak soldier, Keeler, fired his plasma rifle wildly, his heart pounding as he watched his squad mates fall one by one. The HFY felt no fear, showed no mercy. A shadow loomed over him. Keeler turned, eyes widening in terror as a massive HFY warrior raised its blade. Before he could react, a brilliant flash of light erupted across the battlefield. A moment later, the sky cracked open. The unknown fleet, every soldier, Zorvak, and Zelfhar alike, froze as a massive energy surge rippled through the air. The dark void above the planet split apart, and from the rift in space, a fleet appeared. At first, no one knew who they were. Sleek, black warships with glowing blue thrusters poured into the system, moving with a precision and discipline unlike anything the Zorvaks had ever seen. The HFY fleet immediately moved to intercept. Bright streaks of plasma fire erupted across the sky as the new arrivals engaged the enemy. On the ground, Keeler stared upward, barely able to process what he was seeing. Who are they?" he whispered. Then, a deep voice echoed across the battlefield, transmitted through every communication channel, every device, every ship. "This is Admiral Hayes of the Terran Defense Fleet. Stand down or be destroyed." The word sent a chill through the Zorvaks. Humans. No one had seen them in action before. No one knew if the stories about them were true. But as the first human warships opened fire, the balance of power shifted in an instant. The first strike. The HFY warships, once considered unstoppable, suddenly began exploding one by one. Their shields, designed to withstand conventional energy weapons, were completely useless against the kinetic railguns and fusion cannons unleashed by the human fleet. In a single coordinated strike, the Terran ships wiped out an entire enemy battle group. The Zorvax could only watch in stunned silence. For the first time in their history, the HFY were losing. For the first time in days, the Zorvax had hope. But was this mysterious new force truly here to save them? Or was something even more dangerous about to begin? The unknown fleet arrives. The battlefield fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the distant crackle of burning wreckage. The Zorvax, exhausted and battered, stared at the sky in disbelief. The impossible had happened. The HFY fleet, feared across the galaxy, was falling apart. Their once invincible warships were now burning husks, ripped apart by weapons no one had ever seen before. The newcomers, the Terran Defense Fleet, had changed the battle in a matter of minutes, but no one knew why they were here. Inside the Zorvac command bunker, Chancellor Valen and his surviving officers watched the chaos unfold on their holo-displays. Even General Zeklor, a hardened warrior who had fought for decades, could only whisper in shock. They're winning. The HFY's last stand. The HFY were ruthless, but they were not cowards. Even as their ships were torn apart, they refused to flee. Their supreme warlord, Overlord Sarvek, a being infamous for never surrendering, barked out a final command across all channels. All HFY units, ATACK. We will drown them in blood. It was a desperate order. Zelfar ground forces, still in the middle of invading Zorvik Prime, abandoned their targets and turned their fury on the Terran fleet. Thousands of enemy ships, frigates, bombers, and dreadnoughts raced toward the human warships, weapons glowing with deadly energy. A single, massive battleship at the center of the Terran fleet adjusted its position. Its hull bore the name TDS Vengeance, and its presence alone sent a wave of unease through the enemy. Then, Admiral Hayes' voice cut through the war-torn comms. So be it. The firepower of humanity. Without hesitation, the Vengeance opened fire. A single shot from its forward cannon ripped through an entire HFY dreadnought, splitting the massive warship in two like it was made of glass. Then, in perfect unison, the rest of the Terran fleet unleashed hell. Railguns, high-speed projectiles moving faster than the eye could track, punched straight through enemy armor. Autonomous attack drones darted between enemy formations, tearing apart ships with surgical precision. EMP waves disabled entire squadrons, leaving HFY vessels helpless before the slaughter. The HFY had never faced anything like this. Their shields, designed for energy-based warfare, meant nothing against pure kinetic devastation. Their pilots, trained to fight lesser civilizations, were outmaneuvered at every turn. The tide of battle shifted from a desperate last stand to an extermination. Fear in the eyes of monsters. For the first time in their history, the HFY knew fear. On the bridge of his warship, Overlord Sarvek clenched his claws, watching as his mighty fleet was reduced to drifting wreckage. His warriors, the so-called unstoppable force of the galaxy, were being butchered. He turned to his officers. "Send a distress signal to High Command," he growled. "The humans are unlike anything we have ever faced." But before the message could be sent, a Terran stealth corvette decloaked right above their ship. A second later, a single precision strike from a human warship obliterated the HFY command vessel in an instant. Zarvek's last thought before his death was disbelief. The HFY Dominion, for the first time in its history, was losing a war. A world saved, but at what cost? On the ground, Zorvac survivors emerged from the ruins, staring in shock at the sky. The battle was over. Chancellor Valen could barely process what had happened. The humans had come, not as conquerors, but as saviors. But the question remained, why? Before he could think further, a transmission came through on all open frequencies. Admiral Hayes' voice echoed across the system. "This is the Terran Defense Fleet. The HFY invasion force has been neutralized. All remaining enemy units are to surrender immediately. Zorvik Prime is under our protection. The Chancellor felt his knees go weak. Protection. Why would humans, Deathworlders, as some called them, risk their forces for an alien species they had never met? Then, the true weight of the situation hit him. The galaxy had just changed forever, and no one knew what the Terrans truly wanted. First contact and first blood. The battlefield lay in eerie silence. Smoke curled into the sky. The once invincible XL-Thar fleet, now nothing but burning wreckage orbiting Zorvik Prime. The Zorvax, battered and bloodied, watched from the ground as the last of the enemy forces were hunted down with terrifying precision. The Terran defense fleet had arrived, and they had changed everything. Inside the ruined Zorvik command bunker, Chancellor Valen stared at the transmission screen. The voice of Admiral Hayes still echoed in his ears. Zorvik Prime is under our protection. The words made no sense. No one in the galaxy had ever helped the Zorvax before. The universe was a cruel place. Strong species ruled, weak ones were crushed. That was the natural order. And yet these humans had risked their entire fleet to save a race they had never met. Valen turned to his advisors, who stood frozen, their expressions ranging from shock to suspicion. "What do they want?" whispered General Zeklor. No one had an answer. The arrival of the Deathworlders. A few minutes later, the sky split open once more. From the massive human warships, black drop pods screamed toward the surface, cutting through the clouds like meteors. They moved with terrifying speed, impacting the ground with bone-shaking force. Then, the pods opened, and the Deathworlders stepped out. The first thing the Zorvax noticed was their size. The humans were taller, broader, and more imposing than any species they had ever seen. Clad in black armor with glowing red visors, they looked more like machines of war than living beings. Terran Marines. They moved in perfect synchronization, weapons raised, scanning the ruins with cold efficiency. Even without speaking, their presence alone carried a clear message. These were not diplomats. These were warriors. First contact. Chancellor Valen and his remaining officers gathered at the ruins of their capital spaceport, waiting for the humans to approach. Around them, surviving Zorvax soldiers whispered nervously, some gripping their weapons despite knowing it was useless. Then, Admiral Hayes arrived. A single dropship hovered over the platform, sleek and angular, its engines barely making a sound. The moment it touched down, the doors slid open with a hiss, and a single figure stepped out. Admiral Jonathan Hayes was an older man, his face weathered by years of war. Unlike the armored Marines behind him, he wore a dark military uniform, the insignia of the Terran Defense Fleet gleaming on his chest. His icy blue eyes scanned the Zorvax with a calculating gaze. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Valen gathered his courage and took a step forward. His voice was hoarse, trembling slightly. "Admiral Hayes, you have saved my people." "You sent a distress call," Hayes interrupted, his tone neutral. "We answered." Valen hesitated. The human's voice was calm, controlled, but unreadable. "Why?" the Chancellor finally asked. Hayes tilted his head slightly. "You were about to be exterminated. We don't stand by and watch genocide." The words were simple, direct, but they carried an unspoken weight. The Zorvax had always believed that no one cared about the weak. That was the law of the galaxy. And yet, these Deathworlders had come for no other reason than to stop an atrocity. Valen swallowed. The XL-Thar have ruled through terror for centuries. No one has ever dared to challenge them. Hayes let out a quiet breath, his expression unreadable. They should have known better. The XL-Thar's last gamble. Before Valen could respond, alarms blared across the ruined city. The Zorvax soldiers turned as a massive explosion erupted in the distance. The XL-Thar were still here. A single XL-Thar warship, previously thought disabled, had suddenly come back online. Weapons charge, targeting the Zorvax survivors. It was a final act of revenge, a last desperate attempt to erase the species they had failed to conquer. Valen's eyes widened in horror. No. The HFY ship fired. A blinding beam of energy raced toward the ground, enough to wipe out thousands in an instant. But it never landed. Because the moment the enemy fired, a single human warship intercepted the attack. The TDS Vengeance moved like lightning, its shields flaring as it absorbed the entire blast. Then, in a single, brutal counterstrike, the Terran warship unleashed a railgun volley that punched straight through the HFY vessel's core. The enemy ship shattered like glass, debris raining down in fiery streaks. The battle was truly over. The message of humanity. As the dust settled, Admiral Hayes turned back to Valen. "You asked me why we came," he said, his voice cold. "The answer is simple." He took a step closer. The Zorvax, despite being saved, felt a shiver run through them. "The HFY believe in conquering the weak," Hayes continued. "They thought they could burn a world and get away with it." His gaze hardened. "We came to prove them wrong." For the first time, Valen saw it clearly. Humanity was unlike any species he had ever known. They were not conquerors. They were not saviors. They were something else entirely. And as the Zorvax looked at the ruined battlefield, at the ashes of the HFY fleet, they understood one terrifying truth. The galaxy had just met its reckoning. Humanity's true strength. The fires of battle had faded, but an unsettling quiet now loomed over Zorvik Prime. The sky, once filled with HFY warships, was now a graveyard of twisted wreckage. Their once mighty empire had never suffered such total annihilation. And yet there it was. A single Terran fleet had done the impossible. Inside the Zorvik capital's shattered command center, Chancellor Valen sat motionless, his mind racing. The humans had won, but their true power still remained a mystery. Who were these Deathworlders? What was their real purpose in coming here? A deep voice shattered his thoughts. "Your world is secure," said Admiral Hayes, standing before him. His stance was rigid, unreadable. Behind him, armored Terran Marines moved in absolute discipline, securing the city with chilling efficiency. "We destroyed every HFY warship within the system," Hayes continued. "Their remaining ground forces have surrendered or been neutralized." There was no pride in his voice, no boasting, just a statement of fact. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Valen stood, choosing his words carefully. "You have saved us," he said slowly, "but you did not have to. The galaxy does not work this way." Hayes studied him for a moment, then gave the slightest hint of a smirk. "Maybe that's the problem." Valen felt his blood run cold. There it was. The truth. The art of war. The Zorvax had been in awe of human firepower, but now they saw something far more terrifying. Their minds. This victory had not been brute strength alone. It had been precise, calculated, efficient. The HFY had outnumbered the Terran fleet 10-1. And yet, the humans had never fought a battle they didn't already know they would win. Their stealth ships had infiltrated HFY communications before the battle even began. Their eye-controlled drones had disabled key enemy systems before the first shots were fired. Their warships had positioned themselves with mathematical precision, ensuring every HFY counterattack would be met with overwhelming force. The HFY never stood a chance, and that was what terrified Valen the most. Humanity had not fought this battle with desperation. They had fought it with control. They had never once feared losing. The broadcast. Before Valen could process it all, a new voice interrupted the silence. Admiral Hayes, a human officer, spoke through his communicator. "You need to see this. The HFY have made a public broadcast across the sector." Hayes turned to a nearby holoscreen as the feed flickered to life. A HFY High Chancellor, bloodied but still defiant, stood before his people. His mandibles twitched with barely contained fury. "This is a declaration to the galaxy." The alien snarled. The Deathworlders have revealed themselves. Humanity is a threat to all. If they are not stopped, they will become the new dominators of the stars. Valen stiffened. This was bad. The HFY were framing humanity as a greater evil, not conquerors, but something far worse. And the worst part, the rest of the galaxy might believe them. A dangerous precedent. Hayes sighed, rubbing his temple. He had expected this. The HFY never accepted defeat, even in death. This will not be the last time we fight them, Hayes muttered. Valen turned to him sharply. You don't seem surprised. I'm not, Hayes said. His voice was calm, but there was something deeper, a cold understanding of how wars were fought. The moment we revealed our strength, we became a target. The moment we interfered, we changed the balance of power. The Admiral's gaze met Valen's. The rest of the galaxy will not be thanking us for this. The Chancellor felt a chill. He understood now. The HFY had ruled through terror. The galaxy had learned to fear them. But now, for the first time in history, there was something even stronger. Something the galaxy would soon learn to fear even more. Humanity. What comes next? A transmission flashed on Hayes' console. His officers looked up from their displays. Sir, one of them said, we're detecting long-range movement. Multiple fleets across the sector are mobilizing. Some against the HFY. Others. The officer hesitated. Against us. Valen's breath caught. The war was not over. It had only just begun. Admiral Hayes turned toward the horizon, his expression unreadable. The fires of war were already spreading beyond this world. For the first time, humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage. Now the question was, would the galaxy accept them, or would they try to stop them? The last stand of the HFY. The embers of war still smoldered over Zorvik Prime, but the real battle was only beginning. Across the sector, the HFY Dominion had ignited a firestorm of fear, broadcasting their warning to the galaxy. In their desperation, they twisted the truth, claiming that humanity was an unstoppable threat, one that would consume everything in its path if not dealt with immediately. For the first time, alien empires were listening. And as fleets mobilized, as leaders debated whether to fight or negotiate, one thing became horrifyingly clear. The HFY were not done yet. The HFY's final gamble. Aboard a hidden Sci-Fi command station, one of the last in the sector, Overlord Krasvan, the last remaining warlord of the Dominion, stood before his elite generals. His red eyes burned with hatred as he played back the battle reports. The Terran Defense Fleet had annihilated their forces on Zorvik Prime, reducing what was once an unstoppable war machine to a collection of burning wrecks. This cannot stand, he growled, his mandibles clicking with barely contained fury. A younger officer stepped forward, clearly afraid but determined. My overlord, we have lost too many ships. We cannot challenge them directly. Krasvan slammed his fist against the table, cracking the metal beneath his claws. I know that fool, he snarled. That is why we will not fight them in open battle. The room fell silent. The Overlord's red eyes gleamed with malice. We cannot defeat these Deathworlders with firepower alone. But war is not won only with weapons. It is won with strategy. He leaned forward, his voice a whisper of venom. We will make the humans feared, not by fighting them, but by forcing the galaxy to fight for us. The trap is set. The HFY, once ruthless conquerors, had now become something far worse, cornered animals. And cornered animals did not fight fair. Across the sector, HFY sleeper agents activated, spreading lies, fear, and propaganda. Misinformation ran rampant, convincing alien civilizations that the humans were not just warriors. They were conquerors in disguise. Several neutral empires now viewed the Terrans as an emerging galactic threat. Rumors spread that Earth had dozens of hidden fleets, waiting to strike, that their weapons could tear apart entire planets, that they would not stop at the HFY. but would claim dominion over all. And just as planned, the galaxy began to turn against them. A war humanity did not ask for. Back on Zorvik Prime, Admiral Jonathan Hayes stood on the observation deck of the TDS Vengeance, watching the endless field of wreckage floating in orbit. His mind was racing. Humanity had won the battle. But why did it feel like they were about to lose the war? A voice broke his thoughts. "Sir." He turned to see Commander Alan Drake, his second in command, standing rigidly at attention. "You need to see this." Drake handed him a datapad. The screen was filled with news broadcasts from across the sector. Reports from neutral systems, fleet movements, political debates. Alien coalitions were forming, not to fight the XLFAR, but to contain humanity. Hayes exhaled slowly. So this was how it would be. They had saved a planet, crushed a tyrant, stopped a genocide, and the galaxy hated them for it. He placed the datapad down, rubbing his forehead. "Status of the fleet?" he asked. "All systems operational," Drake said. "But we just received a priority alert from High Command." Hayes looked up. "What kind of alert?" Drake hesitated. "Earth has ordered us to stand down. We are not to escalate conflict. Any engagement with other galactic factions must be avoided." For a moment, the bridge was silent. Then, Hayes chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. "We saved a world," he muttered, looking out at the battlefield. "And now we're being told to step aside while the galaxy decides whether to put us in chains." Drake didn't respond. He didn't have to. Because the truth was obvious. The XLFAR hadn't lost. Not really. They had simply shifted the war to a battlefield humanity wasn't ready for. The last stand begins. But the XLFAR had made one fatal mistake. They thought humanity was weak because it followed rules, because it showed mercy, because it believed in honor. They had no idea what happened when humans were pushed too far. Across the system, small distress calls began appearing, ships that had survived the battle, barely clinging to life. One such signal came from deep within an asteroid belt, barely strong enough to be detected. The Zorvax had assumed it was just another wrecked ship, another remnant of the battle. They were wrong. A signal from the shadows. Deep in the asteroid belt, a single XLFAR vessel drifted in silence, powered down to avoid detection. Inside, Overlord Krasthon stood before his command console, sending a message on a hidden frequency. A message not meant for his own people, but for someone far worse. The shadows of the galaxy had always watched from afar, waiting, studying, and now, at last, they were being called to act. "The humans have revealed themselves," Krasthon whispered into the transmission. "It is time." There was silence. Then a response. A voice, cold, emotionless, ancient. "We are listening." And at that moment, in the darkest corners of space, something shifted. The humans had crushed the XLFAR. But the XLFAR had just awakened something far worse. And the war was no longer just theirs to fight. The choice. The galaxy was on edge. Word had spread like wildfire. The Deathworlders had revealed themselves. And they were terrifying. The XLFAR had been crushed, their empire shattered, their fleets reduced to debris. But instead of celebration, there was fear. The galactic community was not thanking humanity for stopping the XLFAR. They were preparing for war against them. And at the center of it all, aboard the TDS Vengeance, Admiral Jonathan Hayes knew humanity stood at a crossroads. Would they step back and let the galaxy decide their fate? Or would they make the decision for them? The warning. The Zorvak High Council had gathered, their expressions grim. Chancellor Valen looked more exhausted than ever, his scaled features pale with worry. "We just intercepted new transmissions," Valen said, his voice barely above a whisper. "At least 5 major galactic factions are considering a preemptive strike against your people." Admiral Hayes barely reacted. He had expected this. "They fear you," Valen continued. They see what you did to the XL-FAR. They think if they do not stop you now, they never will. Hayes exhaled slowly. Typical. Valen's eyes narrowed. You don't seem concerned. Hayes finally looked up, meeting the alien leader's gaze. They are afraid because they assume we are like the XL-FAR. He leaned forward. They assume we will conquer, that we will burn worlds, that we will force our rule upon them. Valen hesitated. And will you? Hayes smirked. No. Then, after a pause, he added, but if they come for us, they will not find us unprepared. A betrayal from the stars. Just as the conversation ended, alarms blared across the command deck. The holoscreen flickered, displaying an incoming fleet signature. Zorvek officers tensed. What is it? Valen demanded. Hayes already knew. The attack has begun. Outside, from the far edge of the system, a massive fleet dropped out of hyperspace. It was not XL-FAR. It was not pirates. It was a coalition of multiple species gathered under a single banner. And their weapons were locked on the Terran fleet. The galaxy had made its choice. It had chosen war. Humanity's answer. Silence filled the command deck. Every Zorvak soldier looked at Admiral Hayes, waiting for his reaction. The Admiral simply nodded. Open a channel, he said. A moment later, the enemy fleet's commander appeared on the holoscreen. An Alvarian warlord, his crystalline form shimmering under the ship's dim lighting, stood at attention. Humans, the warlord said coldly, you have demonstrated power beyond what should be allowed. You are an anomaly, a threat. The time has come for balance to be restored. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. I see, he said. And if we refuse to surrender? The Alvarian's voice turned sharp. Then you will be eradicated. A low chuckle escaped Hayes' lips. I was afraid you'd say that. Then he looked at his officers. All ships, weapons free. The Battle of the Reckoning. In an instant, the battlefield erupted. The coalition fleet, expecting hesitation, was instead met with coordinated, overwhelming firepower. Human warships did not just defend. They attacked. They tore through enemy formations with brutal efficiency. Their advanced eye-targeting systems calculated every weakness, turning the battle into a slaughter. Enemy ships, designed for conventional warfare, were completely unprepared for human tactics. Terran stealth cruisers slipped behind enemy lines, disabling command ships before they could even react. Terran dreadnoughts, equipped with railgun artillery, tore through capital ships like they were made of paper. Terran Marines, launched in high-speed drop pods, boarded enemy vessels and took them from within. It was not a battle. It was a warning. The galaxy had come for humanity. And now, humanity was coming for the galaxy. A new power is born. As the battle raged on, an urgent transmission flashed across human fleet channels. A message direct from Earth's High Command. The officers read it. Then, slowly, they turned to Admiral Hayes. Sir, one of them hesitated. New orders. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Well, the officer exhaled. Earth has just declared that humanity will no longer be bound by galactic diplomacy. Hayes smirked. About damn time. Then he turned back to the battlefield. Send the message. A moment later, humanity's first official broadcast to the galaxy was sent, and its message was simple. We did not seek war, but war has come to us. You wanted to know what Deathworlders are capable of. Now you will learn. Across the stars, across every system, the message was heard. The galaxy had made its choice, and humanity had answered. The war for the future begins. The choice. The galaxy stood at a crossroads. Humanity had won its first battle on the galactic stage, shattering the XL-FAR Dominion's invasion of Zorvik Prime. But in doing so, they had triggered something far worse. Fear. The galaxy was not celebrating their victory. It was watching them. judging them, and some were preparing to fight them. Aboard the TDS Vengeance, Admiral Jonathan Hayes stood in the command center, staring at the tactical displays. Reports flooded in from across the sector. Telfar remnants regrouping, alien factions debating whether to challenge humanity, distress signals appearing from unexpected corners of space. But one thing stood out above all else. Something else was moving. Something even the XLFAR feared. The phantom signal. "Sir," Commander Drake's voice was tight. "We just intercepted an unknown transmission." Hayes turned, his jaw tightening. "From who?" "That's the problem," Drake said. "We don't know. The encryption is unlike anything we've ever seen." A cold silence filled the room. "Play it." The audio crackled, distorted, like a whisper from the void itself. "They have awakened the slumbering dark. The galaxy has forgotten us, but we have never forgotten them." Hayes exchanged glances with his officers. The voice was not Telfar. It wasn't Zorvik. It wasn't anything they recognized. But it was ancient, cold, calculated, and filled with purpose. Commander Drake exhaled. "Sir, we don't know who or what sent this, but there's more. Long-range scans show movement in deep space, entire sectors going dark. No distress calls, no signs of battle." Hayes' eyes narrowed. "This isn't a battle," he murmured. "This is something else. The weight of humanity's future." Chancellor Valen of the Zorvax stood nearby, watching the exchange in silence. Finally, he spoke. "The XLFAR were already feared by the galaxy," he said. "Now you have crushed them. But something else was waiting in the shadows." He looked directly at Hayes. "You humans, you don't understand what you've stepped into." Hayes didn't blink. "We understand just fine." Valen exhaled, shaking his head. "You fight with the precision of a scalpel, the force of a hammer, but you have revealed your hand too early. The galaxy is still deciding what to do with you. If this enemy rises, and the galactic powers believe you are just another threat, they won't side with you." He paused. "They will side against you." The weight of the words settled over the room. Hayes turned back to the star map. The XLFAR war had been only the beginning. Now, the humans had a choice. Do nothing and allow the galaxy to turn against them. Strike first and risk proving the galaxy's worst fears. Or prepare for a war they didn't start, but would have to finish. A meeting with Earth. A priority transmission came through, from Earth itself. Hayes accepted the call, and instantly, the face of President Elias Carter appeared on screen. The leader of humanity's unified government was calm, yet focused. "We've been monitoring the situation," Carter said. "The Galactic Council is calling for an emergency meeting. The XLFAR claim we are a threat. The other factions are unsettled." He leaned forward. "And now, this new variable, the unknown force. I assume you've seen the reports." Hayes nodded. "Something old is moving." Carter exhaled. "We need to decide, Admiral. Do we reveal our full strength, or do we let the galaxy come to us first?" The bridge was silent. Every officer present knew what this meant. If humanity waited, they risked being surrounded by hostile forces. If humanity acted, they could be seen as the very tyrants the XLFAR warned about. A choice had to be made. Hayes' next words would shape the future of humanity itself. He took a deep breath. Then he spoke. "We don't wait for the storm. We become the storm. A new era begins." The decision had been made. Humanity would not wait to be judged by a fearful galaxy. They would define their own fate. Admiral Jonathan Hayes stood at the bridge of the TDS Vengeance, his eyes locked onto the swirling void of deep space. The weight of history rested on his shoulders, but there was no hesitation in his heart. They had saved Zorvik Prime. They had shattered the XLFAR Dominion. And now they had awakened something even worse. The whispers in the dark. The unknown enemy that had stayed hidden for centuries. The one that now moved through the stars. devouring everything in its path. They didn't know what it was, but it knew them. A galaxy on the edge. Across the sector, galactic powers were making their moves. The Galactic Council, once neutral, now debated whether to classify humanity as a threat. The HFY remnants, though broken, were rallying allies under the guise of stopping the Terran menace. Rogue fleets, pirate factions, and mercenary warlords shifted their allegiances, sensing the winds of change. And in the far reaches of space, entire star systems had gone silent. Something was coming. Something terrifying. The first encounter. The TDS Vengeance led a reconnaissance fleet into the sector where ships had gone missing. Dozens of human, Selfar, and neutral ships had vanished without a trace. No distress calls. No debris. No survivors. But as the fleet arrived, they found something horrifying. A planet, once populated, was now hollowed out. Not destroyed. Not burned. Just emptied. The cities were intact. The power grid still ran. The atmosphere was stable. But there was no life. No bodies. No signs of battle. Everything had simply vanished. Then the transmissions began. Whispers, static-filled voices crawling through the comms. They have always been here. The stars remember. You opened the door. Now they are awake. Then the radar systems flashed red. Something was moving. The Shadow Fleet. They appeared like ghosts. Dark, angular ships emerged from the void, their surfaces reflecting no light, as if they did not belong in this reality. No weapons fired. No messages were sent. They simply watched. Then, without warning, the first human scout ship exploded. Not from a weapon. From the inside. A moment later, more ships began vanishing. One by one, they blinked out of existence, as if they had never been there at all. A new kind of war had begun. Not one of brute force, but of fear itself. The warning to the galaxy. Admiral Hayes stood frozen, watching his fleet dissolve before his eyes. His mind raced. This wasn't just an enemy. This was a predator. Pull back, he ordered. Get us out of here. Now. The fleet retreated, escaping before they could be completely consumed. As they emerged back into known space, Hayes wasted no time. He sent a galactic-wide transmission. "This is Admiral Jonathan Hayes of the Terran Defense Fleet," he said, his voice sharp, controlled. "To all civilizations listening, you are in danger." He leaned forward, staring into the camera. "This enemy is not human. It is not Excelfar. It is something older, something worse, and it is coming for all of us." He let the silence hang for a moment. Then he spoke his final words. "You don't have to trust us, but if you want to survive, you will need us." The dawn of the Terran era. Across the galaxy, leaders, soldiers, and civilians alike watched the broadcast. For some, it was a warning. For others, it was a challenge. For the fearful, it was a nightmare. But for those who truly understood what was coming, it was humanity's declaration of war. A war not for power, not for conquest, but for survival itself. And as the stars burned with the embers of old empires and new alliances, one truth became clear. The humans had arrived, and they were not leaving.